Hello and welcome back to the Movie Memo Recaps. Today we are going to recap a 2022 movie titled There Are No Saints. Please be advised that there will be spoilers ahead. In the opening scene, we are introduced to a male prisoner named Neto Niente, who has served several years in prison for a very serious crime. Neto is known to have murdered many people, including women and children, 371 times before finally turning himself into the police. At his last crime, killing a woman and a boy, he felt very guilty and decided to turn himself into the police. Several years after Neto served his prison term, he was finally released on parole by the police agency thanks to the help of one of his male colleagues, Carl Abrahams. Actually, many police officers hate Neto and are unhappy with his release because the crimes that he has committed are very heinous. They thought that dangerous people like him deserved life imprisonment. However, since they didn't have enough evidence, they could only convict him for a few years. It is still unknown whether Neto will become a better person or commit the same crimes again after he is released from prison. But one thing is for sure, he is willing to do anything for his beloved 11-year-old son, Julio. That day, when Neto got out of prison, he was picked up by Carl, one of his old friends closest to him. Carl was willing to spend a lot of money to free Neto from prison because he already owes a lot to Neto. On the way to the hotel where Neto will be staying, Carl immediately gives him everything he needs, from a cell phone, car, passport, and $30,000 so that he can start a new life. That night, when Neto was stretching in the hotel room, he heard the alarm sound from his car, so he went out to check on the situation. Unfortunately, when he came out of his room, he was suddenly beaten and attacked by a group of police officers with repeated bats. Neto does not give any resistance or counterattack to the police because he realizes that the attack was just a trap to get him back into prison. The police officers hate him and think that people with dark pasts like him can never be forgiven. After the beating, Neto returned to his room and treated the bruises on his face and body. The next morning, Neto went to his ex-wife's house named Nadia to meet his son, Julio, to unwind after being separated for years. When Julio saw him, he immediately ran to hug him with a happy feeling. Julio was very happy with his presence, but when he learns that Neto won't be living together in the house, Julio feels very disappointed. Julio explains that their house situation has worsened when Nadia's boyfriend, Vincent, is always rude and often scolds them. Julio added that Vincent did not hesitate to hit Nadia if she accidentally made a mistake. Shortly after, she asked Neto to hurry back to the hotel, considering that Vincent would return to their house soon. Before Neto left, he had time to take some photos of Julio before he left the city. While looking at his photo, Neto remembered what Julio said about Vincent, so he plans to find out about Vincent's real identity. In the evening, Neto goes to a bar owned by his old friend Bailarin, a famous gangster boss in Mexico. He asked Bailarin about the origins and background of Vincent. Bailarin told him that Vincent was a fairly successful property entrepreneur. Still, he also owned an illegal business and worked with drug cartel groups from southern Mexico in the field of arms smuggling. The next day, Neto decides to follow Nadia secretly to find out where Vincent's base is. After a long journey, they finally arrived at a long-abandoned factory, where she entered the factory to ask Vincent for the house dues. When Neto returned to his hotel, he found Julio waiting for him in the hotel room. He immediately brought Julio into the room to rest while seeing some pictures that Julio had taken. In the afternoon, Neto drove Julio back to Nadia's house before he finally went to a parking lot to eat some burgers in the car. While enjoying his dinner, Neto got a short message from Nadia telling him to stay away from Julio because she knew he had many enemies that could endanger Julio's safety. Neto reluctantly agreed to her request because he knew he couldn't be with Julio all the time. Shortly after, a group of men suddenly appeared and surrounded Neto's car while pointing guns at him. Without feeling scared, he stared intently at the gang of thugs and immediately put up a fight when they fired shots. Even though he had to deal with several armed people at once, Neto could still defeat them all very easily. He even managed to blow up the car of one of the thugs who intended to escape from the place. Days later, Nadia and Neto linked up in a parking lot where they had some fun before Nadia warned him to stay away from them for good. All this ongoing, Vincent's goons were witnessing everything and reported back to Vincent. Out of anger, Vincent instructed them to kill Nadia and kidnap Julio. In the evening, when Neto returns to the hotel, he gets a call from Julio saying that their house is currently under attack. Hearing the news, he immediately rushed to drive his car to Nadia's house before something bad happened to Nadia and their son. Unfortunately, it was too late because, by the time he arrived, Nadia was already lying on the floor, covered in blood and lifeless. Shortly after, he realized that the perpetrator of this attack was her lover, Vincent, who intended to kidnap Julio. One of Vincent's men immediately pointed a gun at Neto and threatened him not to put up any resistance. However, Neto could swiftly defeat him and snatch the gun from his hand before a gunfight broke out between them. Unfortunately, after Neto managed to defeat all of Vincent's men, Vincent had already gone and escaped with Julio. Shortly after Vincent's car left the place, the police officers arrived and thought that Neto was the perpetrator of Nadia's murder. He had to run away from that place because the incident had made him a fugitive from the police again. That night, Neto again meets with Carl under the flyover to ask for help so that he can find Vincent, who kidnapped Julio. Carl, who has many connections with the gangsters, says that Neto can start the search by meeting one of Vincent's business partners named Jet Rink, a legal arms dealer who gets supplies from Vincent. After getting some money and a car from Carl, Neto immediately rushed to the nightclub run by Jet Rink. While at the nightclub, he asks the female bartender, Inez, about Jet Rink's location. Then, she says he can ask Jet Rink's girlfriend, Kali, to take him to Jet Rink's house. After Neto gives some money to Kali, she finally agrees to take him to Jet Rink's house and introduce him to Jet Rink. When he arrived at Jet Rink's house, he pretended to be one of Vincent's clients assigned to conduct a survey of all the weapons owned by Jet Rink. Hearing those words, Jet Rink immediately realized that Neto had lied because Jet Rink was a close friend of Vincent's who knew for sure who was Vincent's client. When Jet Rink was about to open fire at him, he had already shot at Jet Rink's leg and stepped on the gunshot wound on purpose. After Neto managed to get information about the location of Vincent's whereabouts, he immediately took some of Jet Rink's money and left the house. Afterward, Neto returns to the nightclub to ask Inez for help pretending to be his wife so they can cross the Mexican state border to go to Vincent's hideout. Not long after, 3 young men suddenly attacked him while in the bathroom, but Neto could easily defeat them. After an agreed payment, Inez decides to help him and pretends to be his wife. As he had previously predicted, they managed to pass the checkpoint at the border because the border police officers were too focused on Inez's sexy body. After they arrived at an inn, Neto allowed Inez to return home the next day because her task had been completed. However, after she discovered that his purpose in doing all this was to save his son, Inez was moved to help him further. With a fee double the previous agreement, Inez plans to dig up information from Vincent by seducing him while pretending to be buying an apartment. At the first meeting, she still couldn't get much information from him, but she still had a chance to find out more at their next meeting. The next night, when Inez meets with Vincent at his main headquarters for a drink, the unexpected happens. He suddenly slapped her and threatened her with because he knew she was actually approaching him on orders from someone. Fortunately, when Inez was in danger, Neto arrived on time and immediately killed every guard in Vincent's house before he finally beat and captured Vincent. After tying him to a chair, Neto tortured Vincent viciously, pouring hot water on his legs and cutting his fingers to extract information on the whereabouts of Julio. Vincent, who was no longer strong with the torture, was forced to confess to Neto that he had sold Julio to a human trafficker named Sands, who was known to often kidnap famous people. Vincent confessed that he was forced to do all that because he had to pay off his debt to Sands. After hearing Sands' name, Neto immediately contacted Bellerin to find out where his human trafficking headquarters were. When Neto returned to the hotel, he advised Inez to return home because this task was too dangerous for her safety. However, it turns out that Inez still wants to help him so he can meet his only son. The next day, when Neto and Inez were at Sands' boxing gym, he asked several men where Sands was. But unexpectedly, not long after arriving at the gym, several men beat him from behind and immediately kidnapped the 2 of them into the car. The car carrying Inez had left first, while the car carrying Neto had fallen far behind. Although his hands were handcuffed, he could easily beat Sands' men and take over the steering wheel to follow the car carrying Inez. After a long journey, Neto finally arrived at a hideout located in a forest area and found the location where Inez was being held together with other kidnapped victims. Unfortunately, Sands' men again managed to catch him and bring Neto in front of their boss, Sands. When Sands saw Neto's arrival, he immediately showed Julio, who was hanging upside down above a well with cold water. He then explains that the reason he bought Julio from Vincent was not a mere coincidence but part of his plan to take revenge on Neto. He wants to take revenge on Neto for the actions that Neto had done in the past, where he killed his wife and his son without any mercy. When witnessing the incident, Neto tried to rebel and put up a fight, making Sands' men angry and intending to kill him. But strangely, Sands killed his subordinates, who almost killed Neto, because he didn't want Neto to die before witnessing the death of his son. After all of Sands' men were dead, Sands approached Neto and forced him to watch Julio's body, who had died after being drowned for several minutes. With his remaining strength, Neto immediately killed Sands and freed all the hostages before finally carrying Julio's lifeless body. The next day, after Neto buried his beloved son with a proper burial, he opened the trunk of the car where he kept Bailorin. Turns out, Bailorin was the one who had leaked all the information about Neto and his family, including leaking information about Vincent and Julio to Sands. After all the things that Neto went through, he finally had to return to his old life, where he had to continue killing and hurting others without mercy. Thanks for watching. If you are new, don't forget to subscribe for more of these recaps. Until next time, have a nice day.